So for the last 3 times I've taught, I teach in different places, but I'm trying to tie it all together. I've been moving backward through the Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path, just to take a big step back, is one of the 2 sets of core teachings that define most Buddhist traditions. Not all, but most. The first one is the Four Noble Truths, kind of the deep understanding of how it is. And the Eightfold Path is the Buddha's recipe for how to cultivate a mind that understands the Four Noble Truths and is deeply at peace. Right? It's the how-to manual. And so this is the 4th talk in a series on the Eightfold Path. And I've been working my way backwards. I actually started with the last instruction going back. But just to revisit it, starting at the beginning, the Eightfold Path starts with right view, which means understanding that what you do matters. So if you act in ways that are generous and loving and kind, you will feel better. And you will tend to create an environment around you that feels better for the other people, and it will also reverberate back to you. So this is very basic understanding of karma, right? Just you live in the world you create, in a way. And the opposite, if you go around, lying and stealing and speaking unkindly to people and ignoring people, then it feels bad on the inside, and the world starts to respond to you based on what you're putting out there. So that's the very first step, is just understanding that what you do matters. It will have an effect. From there, it follows that once you understand that, you set this intention to aim towards the things that feel good. And that happens quite naturally, right? Once you really start to see that your behavior matters, you tend to want to behave in ways that are going to feel better. Then that gets a little more specific. So we start thinking about the way we speak and the way we act and the type of work that we do. And that'll be the subject of tonight's talk, is right livelihood, right? How that intention to show up wholesomely in the world manifests in terms of our survival. And then the path takes this turn. So you get all that somewhat worked out. And there's this realization, actually, that everything we do originates in the mind and heart. As you try to start to live in the world in this wholesome way, you realize actually all of it is coming from the mind state and heart state that you're in a given moment. And so we naturally tend to turn inward. We say, oh, how can I cultivate a mind and a heart that will speak kindly, that will act kindly, that will do work in a way that feels wholesome and helpful? And then from that, understanding that right effort, we move to the last 2 steps of the path, which are mindfulness and collectedness, or concentration, or samadhi. But I really like collectedness. We're going to go with that. And that's the Eightfold Path. And then it comes all the way back around to the beginning again, right view. Once the mind is collected and aware, then you start to see the world really clearly. And you see not just that what you do matters, but there's this sort of large, peaceful quietness holding it all. And then that deeper, more collected mind is able to act and speak and work in ways that are even more aligned with that understanding for what it means to be wholesome and peaceful, and it refines itself. All right. We good so far? Great. So tonight's the 5th step in the path, right livelihood. And in its essence, right livelihood talks about how we feed, clothe, house ourselves, get medicines. I think I got them. In a way that creates peace and well-being inside and around you. Simple definition, not so simple in practice. one of the fun things about teaching the Eightfold Path backwards is that it's gotten me thinking about how each of these steps leads naturally to the next one. Right, so the last time I was talking about right effort, that inward turn. And it's an interesting moment in the path where the Buddha goes from talking about right livelihood, how we work, to the inward turn of cultivating the mind. And my theory, my working inference, is that right livelihood is really that last structural piece. It's the platform upon which your Dharma practice is built, right? Very literally for monastics, they left their homes, their jobs, most of their social obligations, right? And created a livelihood of being beggars. And then that was the foundation for their meditation practice. But the Buddha did not say that that was the only path to right livelihood. In fact, he was very explicit about there being many ways to establish a livelihood conducive to cultivating the path. And for us as laity, I don't think we have any monks here with us today, do we? Any monastics, nuns, bhikkhunis, bhikkhus? No. Okay. So for all of us in this room, it's a more nuanced process. We're having to figure this out in this context, in this city, in 2025. What's this look and feel like? And the other interesting thing about livelihood is it's the most structural aspect of the path. You can refine your mindfulness, your collectedness, your words, your speech, moment by moment, but you can't totally change your job moment by moment. You can change how you relate to it. You can change how you show up in it. But livelihood's interesting in that it has a little more stickiness, a little more rigidity than these other path factors. Right? It determines your schedule often, where you live, the amount of money that's coming in, right? How you allocate your energy through the day, who you're in contact with. And this structure becomes the basis, right, for how a lot of things unfold in your life, including your mindfulness and collectedness. As a brief aside, I found after the birth of my second child that I could not practice mindfulness in this way because I would just fall asleep. So I had to practice in a more ongoing way throughout the day. And then I really came to appreciate walking meditation. That allowed me to practice. But because I'd made those choices about not quite livelihood, but the type of family that I was building and how my resources would be allocated, it fundamentally shifted the way I had to practice. Right? So these two things are deeply connected. Part of the reason that the Buddha created his organization of monastics the way he did was to completely emphasize practice. Right? Let's simplify everything else as much as possible. Right? You don't have to worry about dating, raising kids, filling out your 1099s. Right? Just beg for one meal a day, wear one robe, ask for medicine when you need it, and spend the rest of the time practicing. Right? That very simple. And that path is available to anyone who wants to take it. Right? You can still find plenty of monasteries out there that will gladly welcome you in to live like this. I just like to point that out. This is still going strong. But for those of us who aren't on that path, there's really two things that it points to about how we work. It's sorry, I got ahead of myself there. Two elements here. One is what we do for a living, and one is how we do it. And in Washington, D.C., my hometown, and a place I've spent, I think at this point, most of my adult life as well, we can sometimes overthink in the realm of work and these domains. And I want to invite you tonight to more stay in the how does it feel realm with job stuff. I'll give an example here. Coming out of college, I had a lot of ideas about what right livelihood meant, what it meant to do good work. So with a head full of steam, I went to teach at a middle school that was struggling in California. And really I was gonna change everybody in that class's life forever. But I didn't have the temperament or the wherewithal or the wisdom to be in the situation I was in. I didn't have, I think, what we would now call cultural competencies in the ways that I needed them. And it was a mess. I felt horrible. I was exhausted. I think I resented my students, and many of them resented me right back. Some of them still write me nice notes to say thank you, but it was a pretty hard experience, and I could feel in my body. Certainly by the end, there was a growing awareness that had been a mistake. That was not right livelihood. Even though on its surface, people said, "Oh, this is great work. Glad you're doing it." But it didn't feel right. The Buddha does offer a couple explicit instructions about what not to do. In fact, these are the most explicit instructions on this topic. There's not a lot written about right livelihood in the suttas, but I'm gonna list them all. 5 things not to do. Okay. And if you're in one of these jobs, it's okay. We'll help you. You can always join a monastery. All right, ready? No trading in weapons, no trading in people, a la slavery and human trafficking, no meat trading, no trading in drugs and alcohol, or poison. I haven't met too many poison traders recently. If you're out there, it's time to stop. And again, another example of how the what can seem appealing, but feel funny on the inside. I used to work, you're just getting my resume tonight, for a labor union, and I was a political organizer, and some of the work felt great. There's a number of hotels in the DC area that we got organized that people are making more money and have healthcare and better working hours, and that all feels great. Um, but the people around me were teaching me to do that job uh, by developing the skills of bullying, coerciveness, constant self-promotion, half-truths. And I found myself towards the end of my career actually sitting one time in a room. I worked in DC and New York, and in New York we'd organized some casinos, and the head of I won't name it, one of the casinos in New York, he had like long hair slicked back down to about here and a scar on his face, like straight out of Central Casting for like casino bad guy. And he wanted us to help him pass legislation to make it legal to smoke in the back of the casino, because they'd found that if people had to walk to the back of the casino to smoke, then they never made it back to the front door again because they saw a slot machine and sat down and spent more money. And it felt kind of gross, to be honest, sitting in that room. And I left that job soon thereafter. Um, and so it's complicated, right? We can really go into something thinking we know what's good and what's right, and get in there and find that it's a little bit messy. And that's not to say, I have friends who are still in the world of teaching and labor who are doing it beautifully, who have cultivated these wholesome qualities, who are grounded, who use a different set of tools, who find their way through it in a way that I think is deeply admirable. And I'm very grateful that they're still doing that work, right? But all that is to say, some of this is relative. It's about finding the way that you flourish in the environment that you've planted yourself in. And you're going to know that through how it feels on the inside. And this also is an illustration of the circular nature of the Eightfold Path. As you develop wisdom about yourself, as you learn to watch yourself, as that mindfulness and collectedness develops, Not only are you going to be able to relate to your job more skillfully, but you're also going to get a keener sense of if you're in the wrong spot. Right? You're going to start to say something's not clicking here. And of course, this isn't to say that we all have the same set of choices, right? There are so many ways in which our society does not just offer all jobs to all people. So that needs to be mentioned. But most of us, I think, have some choices. The last thing I wanted to talk about, kind of on that, is our blind spots in the realm of livelihood. It can be very easy to think of work in a narrow way defined by our cultural context. So some examples. The one I just mentioned, it can be easy, especially if you're on the more privileged side of the social structure, to forget that a lot of the jobs and choices available are not available to everyone. Another of these blind spots is actually we become so accustomed to a level of material comfort that it can be impossible almost to imagine living without it in very subtle ways. When that first teaching job, right, I lived in a group house and shopped at a thrift store. I made, I think, $32,000 that year, and I saved 10 of those, right? So, and it was easy. And I can't even imagine doing that now, right? That's hard to wrap my head around how I lived like that. And I still went through a fifth of Baker's Mark a week. I don't do that anymore. But when we think about changing jobs, often where we get stuck, right, is we stop considering types of work that would require a renunciation of some of the things that we're used to and have gotten accustomed to. And one of my favorite things about the Dharma and sitting here uncomfortable in silence with some people you know and some people you don't know is it actually, on the deepest level, allows us to reset and remember that we can be just fine with very little. And going on retreats cultivates this same realization. In fact, you can have some of the most powerful and meaningful and even pleasurable experiences spending days on end, sitting, walking, sitting, walking, sitting, walking, eating, not even getting a full dinner. And it reminds us of something very essential about what it takes to make human beings happy. So that's another blind spot, and it's a blind spot that the Dharma very specifically opens our eyes into. There's another set of blind spots sort of related to that. And this is one that I grew up with, and some of you might know this and some of you might not, but I grew up in Northwest and in the inner suburbs of Montgomery County. And in those suburbs, and even in my sort of family's culture, my mom's side of the family is Jewish, there just were a very narrow set of professions that were okay professions. And then we didn't talk about the other professions, and if they came up, they were kind of quickly dismissed. Those aren't real jobs. That's not a career. You can't do that. And as a practicing therapist, I have had people come to me who grew up in communities like that, who are very sick. They are deeply depressed, drinking heavily, wanting to end their lives. And when we start peeling into it, it turns out that they're the type of person who is born to make art, or who is born to be an emergency services technician, or who is born to work with their hands. And they grew up in a community like mine. And from a very young age, the thing that they knew intuitively that they needed to do with themselves and their lives was considered out of bounds. And they all of a sudden get to this point in their early 20s where they have blocked their ability to imagine the very thing that they need. And I have watched people very daringly sort of tell everybody to can it, they're going to go do this, and those symptoms just start to lift. They start doing work that feels meaningful. They probably make whatever, a tenth of as much as the rest of their family does, but they're connected to something within them that knew that it needed to come out and flourish. And that has been an amazing thing to watch. One more anecdote on that. My senior year of college, while I was writing my thesis, one of my housemates was in the driveway building stilts and making costumes for stilt walkers because he was getting ready to join Burning Man style circus. And I couldn't believe it. I didn't know that that was a thing that one could do. And he kept at it. And then he started selling clothes out of his trunk at Burning Man. And then he started selling clothes out of a little shop in downtown LA. And now he's got a big store on Amazon and it's on a reality TV show and all that fun stuff. But it turns out that's like a real job. And it's so cool. And another friend from that same era started like recruiting us to act in these movies he was making. He was putting on a lot of cinema and doing a lot of cinema critique around movies that featured the queer community and the trans community. It was very cool, and I don't know initially how many people saw those films, but it ended up becoming a basis for like all these artist residencies and teaching gigs, and he has a beautiful, wonderful career. Right? And nobody ever in high school said, would you like to be a circus costume designer or a queer filmmaker, right? Those just weren't things that were offered. And so those can be blind spots too, right? There are so many ways to let ourselves flourish in the world. So to sum it up, some of Right Livelihood is about what we do, both avoiding things that are deeply harmful and opening our mind to the vast array of possibilities that let us flourish. And the other part of Right Livelihood is about how we do it, finding our way into a job that allows us to be honest and generous and giving and at peace with ourselves and kind to the folks around us. And this will never be perfect, right? Because circumstances are changing, right? It's complicated. Meeting our needs, actually making enough to feed and clothe ourselves and get medical care in this society is tricky. And some of the compromises we have to do to get there might make those other aspects of the path harder. So rather than an invitation to find perfection here, it's an invitation to keep shaping your relationship to your livelihood and creating that container for your practice. And I'll stop there.